The other thing that he introduced, which I think is just an amazing concept, because I've spent a lot of time trying to talk in dialogue with Trump Republicans on a reasonable level, and even say that maybe from a foreign policy standpoint, I could say something good about Trump. But what I found is that I'm dealing with people that have cognitive illusions. They don't want to argue, they just want to be right, and they want to hate the Democrats. I did some research for a friend of mine on Hillary Clinton, and certainly she doesn't have a stain-free political background, and neither does her husband Bill. However, they didn't want to hear that. What they wanted to hear was me give them a list of horrible things about the Clintons and never say anything good about it. In other words, they didn't want to try to form a balanced opinion. They wanted to justify their prejudice. And the more I would try to dialogue with them, tone down what I really thought, I would realize that trying to convince someone of anything that is suffering from a cognitive illusion just isn't going to go. And what he suggested in a way is one could set up a kind of a algorithm, and you would say that, for example, if someone believed this, or they believed this, or they believed this, and I got three. If someone were a just downright text-proofing biblical literalist, then I would be unable to discuss them out of their illusion. Recently I had a pretty smart friend drawn to a group which some people represent as being a cult. It turns out it's not really, and they've done some heroic political things. And I wanted to say that. So I said that to her. And she said the most terrible, scatological thing about Republicans. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm trying to defend your position, which is often maligned, in a rational and reasonable way. And all you want to say about Republicans is they're too stupid to unzip their pants when they go to the bathroom. Well, that was the point where I thought that instead of trying to talk to these people, I should be working on my own media production and not do the exhausting expenditure of cognitive energy of trying to reason that which is unreasonable. Well, you might say, well, how do you know, Philip, that you're not under a cognitive illusion? Well, I guess I would say that I reason. I go through steps. I get information. Recently, someone who I very much respect came down hard on Trump's immigration policy and the way children are treated, separated from families, and linked it in an undeniable way to the prison industry. Well, I respect Reich as an economist. I've done independent studies on it. Several of my friends have verified that this is in fact happening. And suddenly, if I continue to have ambiguous feelings about us Americans treating immigrant children like that, then I'm in philosophically bad faith. If I see that and say nothing, I'm like the good German that pretends the train is not going to the concentration camp. I had an experience like this as a young man when I was studying to be a nuclear weapons analyst during the Vietnam War. And I remember getting into a whole discussion about the rationality of taking medical supplies to North Vietnam. I won't go into it, but I finally said in an existential leap that I could not support my country using napalm against children. And that probably cost me a career and a job, but I can sleep better for having done that. And I sort of feel like that now. There's so many things that I have that I've taken for granted my whole life that are going to be taken away, that are being taken away from these millennials, that if I don't act, then I'm morally culpable of being part of the problem. So I'm going to be back at you from a left-wing perspective. I would have more to say about Kahneman's book as I discuss it. It's carrying over to some discussions I'm having with other people about how decisions are made and how you can improve the decision-making process and how that same decision-making process goes wrong. Well, I happen to be a lifetime student of military history, and I think Kahneman's sort of schemata for judging decisions would be really interesting to apply to something like the Battle of Agincourt, for example. I think that my future lies in working as a professional public intellectual in these particular fields, and I'm going to be looking for ways of raising funds to support this project. So if you're out there, Dan Kahneman, expect a phone call. I'm rebuilding my office at this point, and we're turning it into a media production center, and I'd like you to all watch all the videos I've had so far. And I realize that I'm not going to apologize for this. This is a really important change in my life. I'm stepping out and I'm becoming active, just like I became a feminist after I read Susan Brown Miller's book, Against Our Will. It works like this. If you believe something and something else is true, then your premise simply can't be true. You know, there's a lot of bad thinking going on now where people will move from conclusion to searching for evidence to support the preference. Well, that's not the way you're supposed to do. You're supposed to gather the evidence. And as I say, I guess I've gathered enough evidence, especially from a friend of mine, Steve Miller, who's going to watch this video whether he likes it or not. Another old 60s guy who's turned into a successful, articulate, and politically responsible lawyer who wrote a beautiful post on the relationship between Trump's policy and the for-profit prison industry. Now, I kind of wonder how it is that we've gotten from the world that I grew up, when prisons were staffed by professionals with really tough unions that were the vanguard for the rest of the civil service system and and for that matter, academics who were a part of it, to a situation in which international corporations are now viewing prisons as a kind of a soft industry, and communities are trying to recruit them. I can remember a governor of Wisconsin lost an election. I would have to look it up. But basically because he wanted to move prisons out into the rest of the state of Wisconsin, and communities didn't want them yet. So we have a lot of work to do and a lot of political consensus to develop, and a lot of networking that we're not doing because we're putting ourselves into the silos of the like-mindedness. This is one of the best things about being in a university environment and communicating with these young people who are in fact the hope of the future, just like the generation before us, the greatest generations, saved us from having to learn to speak German or Japanese or whatever we might have had to do had we lost that war. This is just as serious stuff, and we've got to start talking to each other. And I realize that in doing this post, a lot of people are going to stop talking to me, but that's their problem. That's not mine. So I think that's about what I have for now, and I'll have more probably to say about the Kahneman book as I put some of his precepts into effect.